Late-night television was a world of glitz, glamour, and controversy. At the center of it all was Jordan Hayes, a talk show host whose sharp wit and unapologetic opinions had made him a household name. Known for his biting humor and fearless approach to hot-button topics, Jordan had carved out a niche as one of the most outspoken atheist voices in the entertainment industry. His show wasn't just about celebrity gossip or lighthearted banter. It was a platform where no topic was off-limits, especially when it came to religion. Whether he was challenging pastors, debating philosophers, or dismantling age-old traditions, Jordan thrived on stirring the pot. Jordan's rise to fame hadn't been accidental. He grew up in a small town, surrounded by people who clung tightly to their religious beliefs. As a child, he often felt like an outsider, questioning the rituals and doctrines that everyone else seemed to accept without hesitation. Over time, those questions turned into skepticism, and eventually outright rejection of organized religion. By the time he landed his own late-night show, Jordan had transformed his doubt into a career, using his quick tongue and razor-sharp intellect to challenge anyone who dared defend faith on his stage. But tonight was different. Tonight, Jordan had a guest who wasn't just another Hollywood star looking to plug their latest project. Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor known for his roles in action-packed blockbusters and heartwarming dramas, was sitting across from him. Keanu wasn't just famous for his movies. He was also admired for his humility, kindness, and quiet strength. Unlike many celebrities, Keanu rarely sought the spotlight for himself, preferring to let his work speak for him. Yet, there was one aspect of his life that intrigued Jordan: his faith. Keanu's spiritual journey was no secret. Over the years, he had spoken openly in interviews about how Buddhism and personal spirituality had shaped his worldview. He talked about finding peace amidst chaos, drawing strength from meditation, and leaning on his beliefs during some of the darkest moments of his life. For someone like Jordan, this was fertile ground for debate. Here was a man who seemed to embody goodness and grace, yet attributed much of that to ideas Jordan considered outdated and irrational. The idea of confronting Keanu about his faith excited Jordan, not because he wanted to hurt him, but because he saw it as an opportunity to make a statement. The studio buzzed with anticipation as the crew prepared for the live broadcast. Clips of Keanu's previous interviews played on the monitors behind the set, highlighting moments where he discussed his thoughts on life, loss, and belief. One clip showed Keanu talking about the death of his best friend River Phoenix. Another recounted his reflections on losing loved ones too soon. Each snippet painted a picture of a man deeply connected to something larger than himself, even if that something couldn't be measured or proven scientifically. Backstage, Keanu sat quietly, reviewing notes for the interview. He wasn't naive. He knew what kind of host Jordan was and understood that this conversation might not be easy. But Keanu wasn't afraid of difficult questions. If anything, he welcomed them. Throughout his life, he had faced hardships that would have broken most people. Yet he always emerged stronger, guided by the principles he believed in. Faith for Keanu wasn't about dogma or rules. It was about finding meaning in the face of suffering and learning to carry on despite the odds. As the clock ticked closer to airtime, Jordan leaned back in his chair, scrolling through the questions he had prepared. Some were playful jabs designed to lighten the mood, while others cut straight to the heart of the matter. He wanted to push Keanu to see if the actor's calm demeanor would crack under pressure. More importantly, he wanted to expose what he saw as the contradictions in Keanu's beliefs. How could someone so intelligent put their trust in something so intangible? And why did Keanu think these ancient practices still held relevance in a modern world driven by science and reason? The energy in the studio shifted as the audience filed in, taking their seats and chatting excitedly. They had come to see Keanu, the man who had become a symbol of resilience and hope for millions, but they were also curious to see how he would handle Jordan's trademark confrontational style. Would he rise to the occasion, or would he retreat into vague platitudes? The air was thick with expectation, a mix of nervousness and excitement rippling through the crowd. Finally, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed, the music swelled, and Jordan walked onto the stage, greeted by thunderous applause. He waved to the audience, flashing his signature grin before turning his attention to Keanu, who stepped out from behind the curtain with his characteristic humility. The contrast between the two men was striking. Jordan, brash and confident, and Keanu, understated and serene. As they shook hands and took their seats, the tension was almost tangible. Everyone in the room could feel it, the promise of a clash between two vastly different perspectives. Jordan kicked things off with a joke, easing the audience into the conversation. He complimented Keanu on his latest film, praising its action, sequences, and emotional depth. Keanu smiled graciously, thanking Jordan for the kind words. For a brief moment, it seemed like the interview might follow a predictable path. But then Jordan leaned forward, his expression shifting from playful to serious. "So, Keanu," he began, his tone casual but deliberate, "we've seen you talk about your faith in other interviews. You've mentioned Buddhism, meditation, and this idea of finding peace in the midst of chaos. I'm curious, how does someone like you, someone so grounded in reality, reconcile that with, well, let's call it what it is, superstition?" The audience erupted into laughter, unsure whether to take Jordan's comment as a genuine question or a jab. Keanu, unfazed, tilted his head slightly, considering the question. It was clear that this was going to be more than just a friendly chat. The game was on, and both men knew it. What happened next would leave everyone watching, both in the studio and at home, speechless. Jordan's opening question hung in the air, sharp and pointed like a challenge thrown down in the middle of a duel. The audience, still chuckling from his earlier quip about superstition, slowly quieted as they realized the tone had shifted. Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair, his posture relaxed but deliberate, as if he were preparing to tell a story rather than defend himself. His calm demeanor seemed almost out of place next to Jordan's animated energy, but it was exactly this contrast that made the moment so compelling. "Well," Keanu began, his voice soft yet steady, "I think faith, or belief, or whatever you want to call it, can mean different things to different people." He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "For me, it's not about superstition. It's about finding a way to make sense of the world when things don't always add up." The simplicity of his response caught Jordan off guard. He had expected Keanu to either dodge the question entirely or launch into some rehearsed explanation about karma, reincarnation, or enlightenment. But instead, Keanu was speaking plainly, almost conversationally, as though he were sharing something deeply personal. This wasn't the polished answer of a seasoned celebrity. It was raw and authentic, and that made it harder to dismiss. Jordan raised an eyebrow, feigning intrigue. "But isn't that what religion does? Tries to explain the unexplainable? Science gives us answers based on evidence. Faith, well, faith just asks us to believe without proof." Keanu nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the point. "I get that, and I respect science, I really do. But there are some questions science can't answer, like why bad things happen to good people, or how to keep going when life feels unbearable." His expression softened, and for a split second, it was clear he was drawing from his own experiences. "Faith helps me navigate those moments. It's not about having all the answers. It's about holding on to hope, even when everything else feels uncertain." The audience murmured quietly, moved by the sincerity in Keanu's voice. Some nodded in agreement while others sat silently, absorbing his words. Jordan, however, wasn't ready to let him off the hook. Leaning forward, he pressed harder, his tone growing more pointed. "So, you're saying faith is just a coping mechanism? Something to lean on when life gets tough?" There was a hint of mockery in his voice now, barely concealed beneath a thin layer of curiosity. "Isn't that just wishful thinking? A way to avoid facing reality?" Keanu didn't react immediately. He took a deep breath, giving himself a moment to gather his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that silenced the room. "Maybe it is in a way, but isn't that what we all do? We find ways to cope, with pain, with loss, with fear. whether it's through art, music, relationships, or yes, faith. None of us has all the answers, Jordan. Faith doesn't claim to have them either. It just offers a path forward. Jordan smirked, clearly enjoying the exchange. A path forward? That sounds nice, but let's be honest, it's also a crutch. People turn to faith because they're afraid of death, afraid of meaninglessness. They need something to hold on to, so they invent gods and rituals to fill the void. The studio erupted into nervous laughter, unsure whether to applaud Jordan's boldness or cringe at his audacity. Keanu, however, remained unfazed. He looked directly at Jordan, his gaze steady and unwavering. Fear might bring people to faith initially, but it's not what keeps them there. What keeps them there is community, connection, purpose. For me, it's about trying to live in a way that honors the people I've lost and makes the most of the time I have left. His words landed with surprising force, cutting through the tension in the room. Even Jordan seemed momentarily taken aback, though he quickly masked it with another jab. That's a beautiful sentiment, Keanu, but isn't it all just guesswork? You're basing your entire worldview on ideas that can't be proven. Doesn't that bother you? Keanu smiled faintly, a mix of patience and understanding in his expression. Not everything worth believing in needs to be proven, Jordan. Love, for example. Can you prove love? Can you measure it in a lab or quantify it with data? No, but that doesn't make it any less real. The audience erupted into applause, many nodding along with Keanu's analogy. Jordan, sensing that the tide was turning against him, tried to regain control of the conversation. Okay, fair enough, love is subjective, but faith goes beyond that. It makes claims about the universe, about morality, about what happens after we die. Those are big claims, Keanu. Claims that require evidence. Keanu tilted his head, considering the argument. You're right. They are big claims. And maybe someday science will provide answers to those questions. But until then, I choose to believe in something bigger than myself. Not because I'm afraid, but because it gives me strength. It reminds me to be kind, to stay grounded, to focus on what truly matters. The sincerity in Keanu's voice was undeniable, and for a brief moment it felt like the entire studio was holding its breath. Jordan hesitated, searching for his next move. He had planned to dismantle Keanu's beliefs piece by piece, exposing what he saw as their flaws and contradictions. But Keanu wasn't playing along. Instead of defending dogma or quoting scripture, he was speaking from the heart, offering glimpses into his own struggles and triumphs. Determined to push further, Jordan adopted a more confrontational tone. All right, let's talk specifics. Your sister's battle with cancer. How did faith help her? Did it cure her? Did it take away the pain? Because if it didn't, then what's the point? The question hit hard, and for the first time, Keanu's composure wavered. His eyes darkened with emotion as he remembered the countless hours spent by his sister's side, watching her fight for her life. Faith didn't cure her, he admitted softly, his voice tinged with sadness. But it gave her hope. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, even on the hardest days. And when she passed, his voice cracked slightly, but he steadied himself. When she passed, it helped me grieve. It helped me find peace, knowing that her spirit lives on in the memories we shared, in the lessons she taught me. The room fell silent, the weight of Keanu's words sinking in. Even Jordan seemed momentarily speechless, his usual confidence faltering. For a man who prided himself on tearing down illusions, he hadn't anticipated the depth of Keanu's conviction. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a glimpse into the soul of someone who had faced unimaginable pain and emerged stronger because of his beliefs. Sensing that he was losing ground, Jordan attempted one final blow. So, what you're saying is, faith works for you, but why should anyone else care? Why should they follow something just because it makes you feel better? Keanu met his gaze squarely, his expression calm but resolute. I'm not asking anyone to follow anything. All I'm saying is, faith has value, for me and for millions of others around the world. It's not perfect and it doesn't have all the answers, but it gives us a reason to keep going, Even when the road ahead seems impossible, isn't that worth something? The audience erupted into applause once again, louder this time, as if releasing the tension that had built throughout the exchange. Jordan forced a smile, pretending to laugh it off, but it was clear that Keanu had struck a nerve. What had started as a calculated attempt to mock someone's beliefs had turned into something far more profound, a reminder that behind every philosophy, every tradition, and every act of faith lies a human story. As the segment drew to a close, Jordan steered the conversation back toward safer territory, asking Keanu about his upcoming projects and future plans. But the damage, or perhaps the breakthrough, had already been done. Both men knew that this interview would be remembered not for the jokes or the promotional plugs, but for the unexpected vulnerability it revealed. And as the cameras cut to commercial, neither could have predicted how profoundly this encounter would change them both. As the commercial break began, the studio lights dimmed slightly and the energy in the room shifted. The audience was still buzzing from the intense exchange between Jordan and Keanu, their applause lingering like an echo of the emotional weight that had just unfolded. Backstage crew members scrambled to reset for the next segment, but on stage neither Jordan nor Keanu moved immediately. They sat there, the silence between them heavy yet strangely charged, as if something unspoken was hanging in the air. Jordan leaned back in his chair, his usual confident smirk replaced by a look of quiet contemplation. For years he had prided himself on being the smartest person in any room, the one who could dismantle arguments with precision and wit. But now, for the first time in a long while, he felt unsure. Uncertain not just about what to say next, but about why he even wanted to say it. He glanced at Keanu, who was sitting calmly, his hands resting gently on his knees. There was no trace of defensiveness or frustration in Keanu's demeanor. Instead, there was a kind of openness, an invitation to go deeper if Jordan was willing. Finally, Jordan broke the silence. "You know," he said, his tone softer than before, almost hesitant. "You didn't answer my question the way I expected you to." Keanu raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Which one?" "The last one," Jordan replied, leaning forward slightly. "When I asked why anyone else should care about your faith, you said it wasn't about convincing people. You weren't trying to convert me or prove anything. That threw me off." Keanu nodded slowly, understanding dawning across his face. "I guess I could have argued more," he admitted with a small smile. "But honestly, Jordan, I don't think arguing changes much. Not when it comes to this stuff." "Why not?" Jordan pressed, genuinely curious now. "If you believe in something so strongly, shouldn't you want others to see it too? Shouldn't you fight for it?" Keanu shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about fighting. It's about living. If my life reflects what I believe, if I'm kinder, more patient, more present because of it, then maybe that speaks louder than any argument ever could. And if someone sees that and feels inspired, great. But if they don't, that's okay too." Jordan frowned, processing this. "So you're saying it's not about winning debates or proving points, it's about action, about how you live." "Exactly," Keanu said simply. "Faith isn't a weapon to use against others. It's a compass to guide yourself. At least, that's how I see it." The simplicity of Keanu's words struck Jordan like a thunderclap. All these years he had approached religion and atheism as a battleground, a place where logic triumphed over emotion, where facts crushed fables. But here was Keanu, refusing to engage in the fight altogether, choosing instead to speak from a place of humility and experience. It was disarming, unsettling even, because it challenged everything Jordan thought he knew about belief. For a moment, Jordan said nothing, staring down at his notes as if searching for a lifeline. Then, in a voice quieter than anyone in the studio had ever heard him use, he asked, "Do you ever doubt it? Your faith, I mean. Do you ever wonder if it's all made up?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Of course I do," he said matter-of-factly. "Doubt is part of the process. There are days when it feels like none of it makes sense. when the pain is too big and the answers are too far away. But doubting doesn't mean giving up. Sometimes it means digging deeper. Jordan looked up, meeting Keanu's gaze. "And what do you find when you dig?" "Hope," Keanu replied without hesitation. "Not the kind of hope that pretends everything will work out perfectly, but the kind that says, even if it doesn't, I'll keep going. That's what keeps me grounded." The sincerity in Keanu's voice was undeniable, and for the first time in the interview, Jordan found himself unable to respond with sarcasm or skepticism. Instead, he sat there, wrestling with emotions he hadn't anticipated. Memories flooded back. Memories of his childhood, growing up in a strict religious household where questions were discouraged and doubt was seen as weakness. He remembered the anger he'd felt when prayers went unanswered, the confusion when rituals failed to bring comfort, and finally, the relief he'd discovered in rejecting faith altogether. For years, he had convinced himself that abandoning religion had been an act of liberation, a victory of reason over superstition. But now, sitting across from Keanu, he wasn't so sure anymore. "You make it sound so simple," Jordan said, finally, his voice tinged with both admiration and frustration. "Like faith is this effortless thing that just carries you through." "It's not simple," Keanu corrected gently. "It's hard, really hard. But it's worth it. Because, at the end of the day, it's not about having all the answers. It's about finding peace in the questions." The audience, which had been whispering among themselves during the commercial break, fell silent again, sensing that something profound was unfolding. Even the crew members paused their preparations, watching intently as the dynamic between host and guest continued to evolve. Jordan took a deep breath, visibly struggling with his thoughts. "I used to believe," he admitted suddenly, surprising even himself. "When I was a kid, I believed everything. I mean, really believed it. But then, things happened. People got sick. Prayers didn't work. And I realized that faith couldn't fix anything, so I walked away. I told myself I didn't need it." Keanu listened carefully, his expression compassionate but neutral. When Jordan finished, he nodded slowly. "That must have been painful," he said softly. "Losing faith, not just in God, but in the idea that the universe cares about us. It can feel like losing hope itself." Jordan blinked, caught off guard by how accurately Keanu had captured his feelings. "Yeah," he murmured. "It did hurt, still does sometimes." "And now?" Keanu prompted gently. "What do you believe in now?" Jordan hesitated, his mind racing. He had spent years crafting a persona built on certainty and skepticism, on the belief that science and reason were enough to navigate life's challenges. Yet here he was, confronted by someone whose beliefs were rooted in uncertainty and mystery. And somehow it felt more real than anything Jordan had experienced in decades. "I don't know," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe I believe in trying, in doing the best I can even when it feels pointless. Does that count for something?" Keanu smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "It counts for everything," he said firmly. "Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Try. Keep moving forward one step at a time." The audience erupted into applause once again, but this time it felt different. There was no judgment, no division, just a shared sense of connection, of witnessing something deeply human. Jordan, for his part, looked momentarily overwhelmed, as if realizing for the first time that vulnerability wasn't a weakness but a strength. As the cameras signaled the end of the commercial break, Jordan straightened in his chair, clearing his throat. "Well," he said, forcing a grin, "that got heavier than I expected." The audience laughed nervously, grateful for the return to lighter territory. Keanu chuckled along, nodding. Life has a way of doing that. Though the rest of the interview focused on lighter topics, Keanu's upcoming projects, his hobbies, and his love for motorcycles, the shift in tone was unmistakable. Both men seemed changed by the conversation, their initial roles as debater and defender blurred into something far more collaborative. By the time the show wrapped up, Jordan walked Keanu off stage personally, shaking his hand with a warmth that hadn't been there at the start of the evening. Back in his dressing room, later that night Jordan sat alone replaying the interview in his mind. For the first time in years he allowed himself to sit with the questions he'd buried long ago, not to solve them but simply to acknowledge their presence. And as he did, he realized that Keanu had given him something far greater than a debate. He had given him permission to seek truth wherever it might lead, whether through faith, doubt, or somewhere in between. The episode aired live, and within minutes it became clear that this wasn't just another late-night talk show interview. Social media erupted with reactions, ranging from admiration for Keanu's grace under pressure to heated debates about Jordan's confrontational style. Clips of the exchange went viral, sparking conversations across platforms. Some viewers praised Keanu for his calm and thoughtful responses, while others criticized Jordan for what they saw as unnecessary aggression. Yet amidst the noise, one thing was undeniable. Something had shifted during that interview. Something raw and deeply human. For Jordan, the aftermath was overwhelming. As the host of a popular show, he was no stranger to criticism, but this time felt different. The comments flooding in weren't just about his arguments or opinions, they were personal. People weren't just debating atheism versus faith, they were questioning him. Why had he attacked Keanu's beliefs so aggressively? Was he afraid of being wrong? Or was there something deeper driving his skepticism? At first, Jordan tried to brush it off. He posted a tongue-in-cheek tweet thanking everyone for tuning in and reminding them that controversy sells. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd missed something important. That night, after the studio, lights dimmed and the crew packed up, Jordan sat alone in his office, scrolling through the endless stream of reactions online. For every comment calling him brave or brilliant, there were 10 accusing him of arrogance or insensitivity. And then there were the ones that hit hardest, the ones asking why he seemed so angry. Angry. The word stuck with him. It echoed in his mind long after he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. Angry at what? At religion? At God? At himself? Jordan had always prided himself on his ability to dismantle flawed ideas with logic and wit. But now he wondered if his arguments masked something more vulnerable, a fear of confronting his own pain. Over the next few days, Jordan retreated from public view. He canceled appearances, postponed meetings, and spent hours pacing his apartment, replaying the interview in his head. Keanu's words kept coming back to him. You don't have to believe what I believe, but maybe ask yourself why you're so angry. Those simple sentences gnawed at him, forcing him to confront emotions he'd buried long ago. It started with memories, fragmented images of his childhood home, the smell of incense during prayer sessions, the sound of hymns echoing through the small church where his family worshipped. Religion had been woven into every aspect of his early life, not as a source of comfort but as a set of rigid rules enforced by an overbearing father. Questioning was forbidden, doubt was seen as rebellion, and failure to comply came with harsh consequences. When tragedy struck, his mother's sudden death when he was 12, it shattered whatever fragile trust he'd once had in the divine. How could a loving God allow such suffering? If faith couldn't save her, what was the point? As an adult, Jordan had convinced himself that rejecting religion had been liberating, a triumph of reason over superstition. But now, sitting alone, in the quiet of his apartment, he realized that walking away hadn't healed the wounds left behind. Instead, it had created a void, one he'd filled with anger and intellectual superiority. Every debate he won, every argument he dismantled had been a way to prove that he didn't need faith, that he was stronger without it. Yet beneath the bravado lay a persistent ache, a longing for meaning that no amount of logic could satisfy. Determined to make sense of his swirling thoughts, Jordan reached out to Keanu. It wasn't easy. Humility didn't come naturally to him, and admitting he needed guidance felt like admitting defeat. But something about Keanu's demeanor during the interview stayed with him. The patience, the lack of judgment, the willingness to listen, even when challenged. So swallowing his pride, Jordan sent a brief email expressing gratitude for the conversation and asking if they could meet privately to talk further. To his surprise, Keanu agreed. They met a week later at a quiet cafe tucked away in a corner of the city. Keanu arrived wearing his signature leather jacket, looking every bit the unassuming Hollywood star who preferred blending in over standing out. Jordan, dressed casually for once, greeted him with genuine warmth, apologizing for any discomfort caused during the interview. Keanu waved it off with a smile. "No apologies needed," he said kindly. "Sometimes we need those tough conversations to figure things out." Jordan nodded, grateful for the reassurance. Over coffee, they dove into a discussion far more intimate than anything they'd shared on camera. This time, there were no cameras rolling, no audience watching, no agenda other than understanding. Jordan opened up about his upbringing, the strict religious environment that had shaped him, and the pain of losing his mother. He talked about how faith had felt like a prison, how turning to atheism had given him a sense of control. But he also admitted the emptiness that lingered despite his success and confidence. Keanu listened intently, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. When Jordan finally paused, searching for the right words to articulate his confusion, Keanu spoke softly. "Faith doesn't have to look the way you grew up with it," he said. "For me, it's not about rules or fear. It's about finding peace even in chaos, about believing that love is stronger than hate, that kindness matters, that life has purpose, even if we can't see it all the time." Jordan frowned, processing this. "But how do you know? How do you keep believing when everything around you says otherwise?" Keanu smiled faintly. "I don't always know. There are days when it feels impossible. But I hold on to the moments that remind me why it's worth it. The connections, the beauty, the little sparks of hope. And I remind myself that doubt isn't the enemy. It's part of the journey." Their conversation stretched for hours, covering topics both philosophical and deeply personal. By the end, Jordan felt lighter, as if a weight he'd carried for years had begun to lift. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider that faith, or the absence of it, wasn't a binary choice. It wasn't about winning or losing, proving or disproving. It was about navigating the gray areas, embracing uncertainty, and finding meaning wherever it could be found. When they parted ways, Jordan knew he wasn't ready to embrace faith in the traditional sense, nor did he feel compelled to defend atheism with the same fervor as before. What he did feel was a newfound clarity, an understanding that his journey was far from over and that it was okay not to have all the answers. In Q. The weeks that followed, subtle changes began to show in Jordan's approach to his show. While he remained irreverent and sharp-witted, his tone softened, especially when discussing sensitive topics like religion or spirituality. He started inviting guests who represented diverse perspectives, not just to argue but to share their stories. One episode featured a rabbi talking about finding joy in grief. Another included a scientist exploring the intersection of quantum physics and consciousness. These segments resonated with audiences, drawing praise for their depth and authenticity. Behind the scenes, Jordan continued to reflect on his own beliefs, or lack thereof. He began journaling regularly, pouring his thoughts onto paper without worrying about coherence or consistency. Sometimes he wrote about his doubts. Other times he jotted down moments of wonder, like watching a sunset or hearing a stranger laugh uncontrollably. Slowly he realized that meaning wasn't something he could find externally. It was something he had to create moment by moment, choice by choice. As for Keanu, he returned to his quiet life, content to let the ripple effects of their encounter unfold naturally. Though he rarely spoke publicly about the meeting, those close to him noticed a slight shift in his demeanor, an added layer of peace, as if reaffirming his belief in humanity's capacity for growth and connection. Months later, Jordan published a memoir titled, "Why Are You So Angry?" chronicling his journey from skeptic to seeker. In its pages, he wrote candidly about his struggles with faith, his confrontation with Keanu, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. The book became a bestseller, praised for its honesty and vulnerability. Critics noted how Jordan's writing reflected a man no longer hiding behind cynicism, but stepping boldly into uncertainty. Looking back, Jordan often thought about that fateful interview, the unexpected turn it had taken, the questions it had raised, and the friendship it had sparked. What had started as a calculated attempt to challenge someone else's beliefs had transformed into a mirror reflecting his own fears and insecurities. And in that reflection, he had discovered something invaluable: the courage to ask the hard questions, even when the answers remained elusive. The release of Jordan's memoir, Why Are You So Angry?, marked a turning point not just for him but for the cultural conversation surrounding faith, doubt, and the search for meaning. The book was more than a collection of anecdotes. It was a deeply personal exploration of vulnerability, resilience, and the complexities of belief. Readers were drawn to its honesty, finding in its pages reflections of their own struggles with uncertainty. For many, it wasn't just Jordan's story, it was theirs too. Media outlets clamored to cover the memoir's success, eager to dissect how a man once known for his biting critiques of religion had transformed into an advocate for nuance and introspection. Talk shows invited Jordan back on as a guest, this time not to debate but to discuss. Hosts asked him about his motivations for writing the book, what he hoped readers would take away from it, and whether his perspective on faith had changed since the infamous interview with Keanu. Jordan answered these questions thoughtfully, often sharing moments from his journey that illuminated his evolution. He spoke candidly about the internal conflict he'd faced after meeting Keanu, how the actor's calm demeanor and empathetic responses had forced him to confront parts of himself he'd long ignored. "I went into that interview thinking I was going to challenge someone else's beliefs," Jordan admitted during one appearance. "Instead, I ended up questioning my own." He described the weeks following the show as a kind of reckoning, a period where he grappled with memories of his childhood, the pain of losing his mother, and the ways those experiences had shaped his worldview. Writing the memoir, he explained, became a form of therapy, allowing him to untangle emotions that had been buried for decades. "It wasn't easy," he confessed. "But I realized that running away from those feelings hadn't helped me heal. Facing them did." One of the most surprising aspects of the memoir's reception was the reaction from religious communities. Rather than criticizing Jordan for his past skepticism, many praised him for his willingness to engage with difficult questions openly. Pastors, rabbis, and spiritual leaders wrote letters thanking him for humanizing the struggle between faith and doubt. Some even incorporated passages from the book into sermons or discussion groups, using Jordan's story as a way to encourage congregants to embrace their own uncertainties instead of fearing them. Social media played a significant role in amplifying the book's impact. Online forums dedicated to philosophy, spirituality, and mental health buzzed with discussions inspired by Jordan's words. Memes featuring quotes from the memoir circulated widely, with lines like, "Doubt isn't the enemy, it's part of the journey," becoming rallying cries for people navigating their own crises of faith. Book clubs formed around the country, bringing together individuals from diverse backgrounds who found common ground in Jordan's message of hope amid uncertainty. For Jordan, the outpouring of support was humbling. He had expected some backlash. After all, his earlier career had been built on provoking strong reactions. But instead, he was met with gratitude. Fans shared stories of how the book had encouraged them to seek deeper connections with loved ones, pursue passions they'd abandoned out of fear, or simply sit quietly with their thoughts without judgment. These messages reminded Jordan that his journey wasn't unique. Countless others were wrestling with similar questions, searching for meaning in a chaotic world. Meanwhile, Keanu remained a quiet presence in Jordan's life, offering occasional advice or encouragement when needed. Though their friendship never became public knowledge, those close to both men noted how much they seemed to appreciate each other's company. They would occasionally meet for coffee or dinner, conversations flowing effortlessly between topics, ranging from movies to meditation to the state of the world. Keanu never pushed Jordan to adopt any particular belief system, but continued to model the same patience and kindness that had first disarmed him during the interview. As Why Are You? So Angry? Climbed bestseller lists and sparked global conversations, Jordan made another bold decision. He announced plans to host a podcast titled The Gray Area. Unlike his late-night talk show, which thrived on quick wit and sharp commentary, this new venture would focus on slow, deliberate discussions about life's big questions. Each episode would feature guests from various walks of life: scientists, artists, philosophers, clergy members, all united by their willingness to explore the intersections of faith, reason, and humanity. The first season of The Gray Area premiered, to critical acclaim. Listeners appreciated the depth and authenticity of the conversations, noting how Jordan's approach had shifted dramatically from his earlier days as a provocateur. Gone were the cutting remarks and sarcastic jabs. In their place was genuine curiosity and respect. Episodes tackled subjects like grief, forgiveness, purpose, and the nature of truth, inviting listeners to reflect on their own lives while learning from others' experiences. One particularly memorable episode featured Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a neuroscientist studying the effects of meditation on the brain. During the conversation, she explained how practices rooted in ancient spiritual traditions could be scientifically validated, bridging the gap between faith and reason. Jordan listened intently, asking thoughtful follow-up questions that demonstrated his growth as both a thinker and an interviewer. By the end of the episode, listeners felt inspired, not to choose sides but to embrace the complexity of existence. Another standout installment brought Jordan face-to-face with Reverend Marcus Thompson, a Baptist minister who had also lost his mother at a young age. Their discussion delved into themes of anger, forgiveness, and finding solace in community. At one point, Reverend Thompson turned to Jordan and said, "Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting that you'll find your way even when the path isn't clear." Jordan nodded, visibly moved, acknowledging how closely those words mirrored Keanu's earlier advice. The success of The Gray Area further solidified Jordan's reputation as a voice of reason in an increasingly polarized world. Critics praised him for creating a space where opposing viewpoints could coexist peacefully, fostering dialogue rather than division. Yet despite his newfound acclaim, Jordan remained grounded, attributing much of his transformation to the lessons he'd learned through his interactions with Keanu and others. Looking back on the journey that had begun with a single interview, Jordan often marveled at how drastically his life had changed. What had started as a calculated attempt to challenge someone else's beliefs had blossomed into a profound exploration of his own. Along the way, he had discovered that faith, or the absence of it, wasn't a battleground, but a spectrum, rich with possibilities for connection and understanding. And though Jordan still didn't identify as religious, he no longer dismissed the power of belief systems to shape lives positively. He recognized that faith, in its many forms, offered something science alone couldn't: a sense of belonging, a framework for making sense of suffering, and a reminder that love transcended logic. For Jordan, embracing this complexity wasn't about abandoning reason. It was about expanding it to include the full range of human experience. In interviews promoting The Gray Area, Jordan frequently expressed gratitude for the unexpected twists his life had taken. "If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be hosting a podcast about spirituality, I would have laughed in their face," he joked during one appearance. "But here we are. Life has a funny way of teaching us exactly what we need to learn, even if it takes a while to sink in." As the second season of The Gray Area launched, Jordan received a handwritten note from Keanu congratulating him on the show's success. Enclosed was a simple quote: "Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful places." Smiling, Jordan pinned the note to the bulletin board above his desk, a reminder of how far he'd come and how much farther there was to go. Through it all, one thing remained clear: the ripple effects of that fateful interview continued to spread, touching lives in ways neither man could have predicted. What had begun as a clash of ideologies had evolved into a testament to the power of empathy, humility, and open-hearted dialogue. And in a world desperate for connection, that message was nothing short of revolutionary. Years passed, and the story of Jordan Hayes and Keanu Reeves became more than just a fleeting moment in pop culture. It evolved into a symbol of something greater. It was a reminder that even in moments of conflict, connection is possible. That, beneath our differences lies a shared humanity, yearning to be understood, and that sometimes all it takes is one unexpected act of kindness or one honest conversation to change everything. For Jordan, the transformation sparked by his encounter with Keanu continued to unfold in ways he never could have anticipated. The gray area grew into a cultural phenomenon. Its episodes downloaded millions of times across the globe. People from all walks of life tuned in not just for answers but for permission to ask questions without fear of judgment. The podcast became a safe space where doubt wasn't shamed, faith wasn't weaponized, and curiosity was celebrated as a cornerstone of growth. Jordan's personal evolution mirrored the show's success. He no longer saw himself as an atheist crusader or a skeptic, bent on disproving belief systems. Instead, he embraced a new identity, that of a seeker. His interviews reflected this shift, blending intellectual rigor with emotional vulnerability. Whether discussing quantum physics with a Nobel laureate or exploring mindfulness with a Buddhist monk, Jordan approached every conversation with humility and wonder. One day, during a particularly poignant episode, Jordan invited Keanu back onto the show, not as a guest to debate, but as a collaborator in storytelling. Together, they revisited their initial encounter, sharing reflections on how it had impacted their lives. Sitting across from each other in the cozy studio, surrounded by soft lighting and the hum of microphones, they laughed about the tension of that first meeting while acknowledging its profound significance. "I remember thinking you were going to destroy me," Keanu joked, his signature grin breaking through. "Instead, you ended up teaching me something too." Jordan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What did I teach you?" "That sometimes anger comes from a place of pain, and that pain can lead to growth if we let it," Keanu replied. "Watching your journey over the years reminded me that everyone carries burdens we can't see. All we can do is listen and try to understand." Their exchange resonated deeply with listeners, many of whom wrote in to share how the episode had inspired them to reach out to estranged friends, forgive old grudges, or simply sit quietly with their own emotions. For Jordan, hearing these stories reinforced what he had come to believe: that true progress happens not in grand gestures but in small acts of empathy and understanding. Beyond the podcast, Jordan's influence extended into broader arenas. Universities invited him to speak at commencement ceremonies, urging graduates to embrace uncertainty as a catalyst for discovery. Community centers hosted workshops based on themes from the gray area, encouraging participants to explore their values and connect with others across divides. Even religious institutions began incorporating his work into interfaith dialogues, recognizing the importance of fostering conversations that transcended dogma. Keanu, meanwhile, remained the same humble figure he had always been, grateful for the opportunities life presented but uninterested in seeking the spotlight. Yet he couldn't deny the role he had played in Jordan's transformation. Friends teased him about being a spiritual guru now, but Keanu brushed it off with a laugh. "I didn't do anything special," he insisted. "I just listened." Listening, however, turned out to be exactly what Jordan needed most. In Keanu's quiet presence, he found not only validation for his doubts, but also a model for how to navigate life's complexities with grace. Their friendship deepened over the years, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to making the world a kinder place. They collaborated on several projects together, including a documentary series exploring the intersection of art, spirituality, and social justice, a project that earned critical acclaim and further cemented their legacy as unlikely allies. As time went on, Jordan often reflected on the ripple effects of that single interview. It wasn't just his life that had changed. Countless others had been touched by the message of openness and authenticity he and Keanu embodied. Letters poured in from people around the world, sharing how their stories had inspired them to confront their own fears, repair broken relationships, or pursue passions they'd once abandoned. Each note served as a testament to the power of connection, a reminder that even the smallest interactions can leave lasting impressions. One letter, in particular, stood out. It came from a young woman named Sarah, who described herself as someone who had grown up feeling torn between her family's strict religious beliefs and her own questioning mind. "Your memoir saved me," she wrote. "It gave me permission to honor my doubts while still finding beauty and faith. Because of you, I've learned to hold both at the same time, and it's made all the difference." Reading those words brought tears to Jordan's eyes. He realized then that his journey wasn't just about him anymore. It was about creating a space where others could find their own paths, free from judgment or expectation. And in doing so, he had discovered a truth that transcended labels like atheist or believer. That meaning isn't something you find. It's something you create, moment by moment, choice by choice. In the final season of The Gray Area, Jordan decided to dedicate an entire episode to listener stories. Titled Ripples, the installment featured voices from across the globe, each sharing how the podcast had impacted their lives. There was a father who had reconnected with his estranged son after hearing an episode about forgiveness, a teacher who started a meditation club for students struggling with anxiety, and a soldier who credited the show with helping him process trauma upon returning home from war. Listening to these testimonials, Jordan felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the platform he had been given, but for the courage of those willing to share their vulnerabilities. At the end of the episode, he addressed his audience directly, his voice thick with emotion. "When I started this journey, I thought I was searching for answers," he said. "But what I've come to realize is that the real gift isn't in having all the answers. It's in learning to live with the questions. It's in embracing the gray areas, the uncertainties, the beautiful messiness of being human, and it's in knowing that none of us has to face it alone." The episode aired to widespread acclaim, marking the perfect conclusion to a series that had touched so many lives. As the credits rolled, listeners flooded social media with messages of thanks, calling The Gray Area one of the most impactful shows they'd ever experienced. Critics hailed it as a groundbreaking contribution to modern discourse, praising its ability to bridge divides and foster understanding in an increasingly fragmented world. For Jordan, the end of the podcast marked not a farewell but a new beginning. With renewed energy, he launched a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting empathy and dialogue through storytelling. Partnering with schools, community centers, and online platforms, the initiative aimed to amplify marginalized voices and encourage cross-cultural exchanges. Keanu joined the board, lending his support and wisdom to the cause. As the years rolled on, both men continued to inspire others in their own ways. Jordan remained a vocal advocate for nuance and compassion, using his platform to challenge stereotypes and dismantle barriers. Keanu stayed true to his roots, quietly living a life of service and creativity, reminding everyone he met that kindness costs nothing but means everything. Looking back, neither man could have predicted the impact of their brief encounter on that late-night talk show. What had begun as a clash of ideologies had blossomed into a partnership rooted in mutual respect and a shared vision for a better world. Their story served as a powerful reminder that even in moments of disagreement, there is always room for connection, if we're brave enough to listen. And so, the legacy of Jordan Hayes and Keanu Reeves endured, not as a tale of opposing forces, but as a testament to the transformative power of empathy, humility, and open-hearted dialogue. In a world desperate for unity, their journey offered hope, that no matter how far apart we may seem, we are all connected by our shared humanity. And in that connection lies the potential for healing, growth, and infinite possibility.